last time we were together, we were still sketching out basic proportions, and now what we're going to do is take our lines from our sketches, clean them up, and do some variations in line quality, which will make our drawings look a little bit more interesting than just a plain contour line drawing. So on a new piece of sketchbook paper, we're going to title this Line Quality, and as always, we're going to put the date. And so for this drawing, we're going to start again with our bottle. And to review, let's draw a bottle in proportion. So again, we start with the bottom ellipse for the base, and then we'll see how tall it is. I'm going to say it's about 1, 2, 3, about 4 times as tall. So 1, 2, 3, 4 times as tall roughly. I'm going to take that at the top right there, and then add in our lines on the sides. Let's just switch pencils here real quick. And then that center line for symmetry. Once we're done with that, we'll deal with the cap. And this one in particular has an ellipse in the center, another one outside of it because we can see inside. Then there are these two kind of tilted edges, and then a longer ledge at the bottom. So we're going to try to do that on our actual bottle, making sure that the proportions are pretty accurate. So 1 ledge, 2 ledges, and then the larger one at the bottom. Make sure you have all those curves in there. Find your transition lines. I'm going to say about halfway, a little less than, and then up at the top here. And we really want to sketch all of our lines very lightly today because we're after a clean line drawing with changes in line quality. So make sure it's cleaned up. Do our defining shapes like so. Make all the connections that we need to. Lower that down actually a little. Okay. And there we have, the rough proportions. And now we want to clean up our drawing and finalize our line. So at this point, you're going to erase all of those sketch marks that we made. And we just want a nice, clean contour line drawing. And it'll look roughly like this once you're all cleaned out. So notice that the lines on here are pretty much even. And what we want to do is vary our line quality, and vary means to have different versions of things. So what we'd like to do is have some lines that are thicker, some lines that are thinner, some darker, some lighter, and that variety is going to make this more interesting. And so at the end, we'll have a bottle that goes from this to this. So just a little bit different. And so to do this along with me, the first thing you want to find out is where do you want to emphasize your lines? Make them a little darker, make them a little thicker. And because we're going to make them darker, we try to find where it's actually darker on our bottle. So if you can see between the left and the right side is a little darker. So we're going to deal with the right side of our bottle, the one we drew. And we're really going to make sure that the entire right side, including the cap, is emphasized with a heavier, darker line. We also want to get the bottom, because the bottom is definitely going to be darker. So keep everything nice and round still. And there we go. And I remind you to take care of the cap because a lot of people will skip it. When they're shading, when they're drawing, they just don't pay as much attention. So we really do want to get in the cap. And to focus on it a little bit more, we had all those ledges in there. Those are also going to have a little bit of a shadow under them. So because of that, we're going to kind of re-underline all of those. And in the portion that's supposed to refer to the inside of the bottle, I'm going to make it a little bit darker along that edge, just to show, hey, there's some inside in here. It's going to be a little bit darker. So there we go. We have all our lines that tell us essentially where the shadows are going to lie, or which sides are a little bit darker. And we emphasize those lines. And if you wanted to stop here, that's fine. Just to add a little bit more detail to this, if you see any places that are a little bit lighter, we go in with a lighter and thinner line, just to differentiate between the lights and the dark. So you can see that on this bottle over here. You can see in the top of the cap, there are some really nice bright lines, and then your light is kind of gonna follow the shape of the bottle. So something like that, except we're gonna go in with a really nice light thin line when we draw these in. Just like that, and there's that little kind of ledge at the bottom that curves in, so we avoid that because it gets a little darker there. If there's any other details that you see, like a label or some lettering, you can feel free to add those in as well. But that's what we have now, so a little bit more interesting than when we started. So this instead of just this. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on organic shapes this time. So we're going to do this apple. So as a quick review on how to draw an organic shape, especially just like a fruit like this, you start with an axis line. Then you find the widest area, and I'm going to say the widest area is really up towards the top. And if you compare how wide that is to how tall it is, you'll get a decent idea of what the proportion should be. So this isn't quite as wide as it is tall. You can mark in your top, which is right up against it, just a little bit shorter, and the bottom, which has a decent amount of space and is maybe about like half of one of those initial circles that we made, or ovals that we made. Speaking of circles, the top of this apple is very round, and so to help me get that shape, I'm going to make a circle or an ellipse shape just to get that sense of volume towards the top. And then I'll make all my connections, and I have a rough idea of the proportions of this apple, not quite all the details yet. I'm going to skip to the stem, and I want to remember that there's a nice dip in there. And so I'm going to add that a little bit lower than the edge, and then our stem. And I don't want to just draw a line for the stem, I want it to also have volume. So I'm going to make this a little bit thicker, show that it has some width to it. And now I can address any areas on the apple that have some bumps to them. If there's any uneven patches, then I can make it look a little bit more accurate to the apple that I actually drew. Alright, once again, we were supposed to draw this very lightly so that we could end up with a clean line drawing, and so we're going to clean this up and just have a nice clean contour outline drawing. Just like last time, what we want to do now is find where it's a little bit darker. Just like with our bottle, the right side is a little bit darker. And so once again, I'm going to emphasize that side of our apple, make it a little bit darker, again at the bottom. A little bit darker over there. And so at this point, we really want to look for any other areas that are darker. And one of those areas is in the inside, heading towards the core where the stem is coming out of. There's like a shadow just like in our bottle where we could see inside of it, this is concave, so it's going down, and we see some shadows in that little dip that we made. So all these shadows going inward, showing us that this is getting darker in towards the center. And so where we made that dip, we also want it to get a little bit darker and have all these kind of curving shadows to show us that it is getting darker in there. Again, just like how we don't want to skip the cap, we don't want to skip the stem of our apple. And so with the stem, if you get in close, you can see that it actually has its own sense of light to it. So there's this highlight right here. So we really don't want to fill in the entirety of our stem, but we want to leave these spaces of light. So I'm going to fill most of this out, but leave a little bit of light unfilled to show that our stem also has light to it. So light and shadow, because it's also an object that has form, so not just a flat piece of nothing on top. So I have my shadows kind of emphasized now. What I'm going to do is focus on the light. So there's definitely a bright highlight in the apple itself, and some people will see like a square or a circle shape, but because this is an organic object, we want our shadows and our highlights to also have that sense of being more natural. So instead of just a sharp square, really lightly, again, because we're showing this is where the highlight is, want to go in and get a more organic, more natural sense of light. So my line is going to be very thin. I'm going to let it squiggle around because this is more natural. And that's the one really bright area that I see, but there are a couple other areas that show some reflected light, so other light sources are also showing. So I can see some along that left edge, a little bit coming over here, so I'll add those in as well. Again, I'm staying very light-handed with my line. And what's nice is these lights don't have to be exactly the same on everyone's because they look natural, so they're all going to look a little bit different. Just putting them in the right areas is what really matters. Finally, there's some at the top, and I know I said that the right side was darker, and it is, but sometimes it does receive a little bit of reflected light anyways. So up at the top here, you can see some of those lights right around the darker shadows, and that's what really makes the shadows look extra dark, is that they're surrounded by light anyways. And then up at the top here, starting at the top and kind of crawling around to the sides as well. And so that already looks a little bit more interesting. If there's any details that you see in it, like this apple has a couple of like spots to it, you're also going to, or you can, add a couple of spots. Now really don't attack your apple, make it look like a bunch of ants are on it, but just pick a couple of places to deliberately choose where you'd like to add some dotting. You can see up towards the top they spread out more than in the bottom. And all those little details, even without shading, will make this look interesting and kind of come to life a lot better. So this is what we have now versus what we had before. And that is how you add variations in line quality to your drawings. So look for the dark, emphasize those areas, and then look for the light and indicate where those are as well. Add any details that you see without making any up necessarily, and then you have a pretty good quality line drawing.